some of the funding that's already been made available, and some of the funding that's going to be coming available sometime soon. And then in the end, I want to talk a little bit about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That's the term that we're using for it now, Bill, BIL, and talk a little bit about some of the funding that's going to come down that will affect EJ from that bill. So if we can move forward. Next slide. All right, thank you. The agency's strategic plan was put out for public notice. The comments were due by November 12th. Hopefully you all had a chance to see that in draft, and if you had comments or thoughts that you were able to share that. Next slide. I want to show you a little bit what that looks like, because it looks very different than it has in past years. If you all paid attention to the agency's strategic plan, which is kind of our direction, what our priorities are for the coming years, in this case 2022 through 2026, generally the goals have been like goal one's been like clean air, goal two clean water, those types of things, and those goals are still in here. But if you'll notice, goal one and goal two are significantly different this year. Goal one is climate, and goal two is environmental justice. And as you can see, there are 4 principles that we're using to manage our work. And the last of the 4 is advancing justice and equity. So it's significant that goal 1 and goal two are the topics that you're hearing about today. Next slide, please. So the American Rescue Plan. Let's talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan for a second. Again, this was the act that was passed in March of this year, I believe, and it was resulted in $100 million of extra funding coming to EPA, and it really came in 2 buckets. One was for environmental justice, that was $50 million, and then another one for air quality, another $50 million. And I want to break that down for you a little bit. So next slide, please. So for the EJ piece of it, not the air piece, the EJ piece, this is how it breaks down. So you can see that this is in addition to our regular annual budget. We had 16 million set aside for grants, 7 for the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, and then you see enforcement, brownfields, children's health, and it goes on down the line there. So these are significant pots of funds that we would be primarily passing through in terms of grants. And I'll share with you a little bit about that status in just a second. Next slide, please. The other bucket, the other $50 million is broken out like this: $20 million for air monitoring grants, $22.5 million for pass-through to air agencies, and then mobile monitoring labs and air sensor loan programs, another $5 million. So again, a significant investment even before the 2022 budget opportunities take effect. Next slide, please. So this is the way that things have played out. So we have in EJ, we have small grants and collaborative problem-solving grants already, but with the American Rescue Plan, ARP, the number of grants increased and the total for each grant increased. So for this year, while we might have normally awarded 2 or 3 grants in Region 7, we plan to award 6 grants worth about $75,000 apiece. And that process has already taken place. We'll make the announcement coming up here in the next month or so. For the collaborative problem-solving cooperative agreements, these are large EJ cooperative agreements. This year, Region 7 is awarding 2 for $200,000 each. And again, we'll make the announcement. That process has already taken place. We'll make the announcement in the first count or the first fiscal quarter, which will be sometime in the next month or so. Environmental education grants. This one is still open. It's a $300,000 total. We're estimating about $100,000 per project, and the request for proposals closes December 6th. And we should be able to make announcements sometime in the spring. Next slide. So for air grants, this one is still open as well. $7 million for diesel emission reductions and $20 million for air monitoring initiatives. And another $22.5 million for National Air Quality Standard Monitoring for state, tribal, and local programs. So we haven't put out the announcement on the street yet. If you all are interested in these types of grants, be sure to watch for that. The RFA will be coming out probably sometime soon. And then water grants, these projects have already gone through the review process. And I don't know if announcements have been made yet, but if they haven't, they will be made soon on the water grants and the primarily drinking water related grants. So next slide, please. Okay, so that was the American Rescue Plan. And again, that was an act that was passed during 2021, and the funding was made available for the most part during 2021 and maybe spills into 2022 a little bit. As you all probably saw, the president signed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, now is what we're calling it since he signed it, right? And that law will have an enormous impact on the agency. So there were two primary recipients of the funding from that law. The first is the Department of Transportation. They were the most significant recipient. The second is EPA. And the reason that our funding from this law is important is because it's significant. You know, our operating budget every year is around $9 billion, somewhere in there. The amount of funding that's going to come to EPA under this law is somewhere around probably 5 or 6 or 7 times our operating budget, just the monies to be passed through for grants and loans and such. So for EPA as an agency, this is how it breaks down. We don't know how it will break down by region yet, but you can see that for state and tribal grants, another $55 billion agency-wide. And you can see things ranging from the state revolving fund to the replacement of lead service lines to PFAS issues, all are going to get significant funding nationally. Next slide, please. Also in this law, underground injection wells, brownfields, $1.5 billion. Pollution prevention, $100 million, and clean school buses, another $5 billion, and Superfund, significant funding as well. So we, as you can imagine, since this was just signed earlier this week, the agency is still trying to understand how it will be impacted and how we can quickly advertise, compete, and award these funds moving forward. So stay tuned for that. There is still a lot to learn about the impact of that law as it moves forward here. Next slide, please. Lastly, you know, even though a lot of folks think of the Gulf of Mexico, the hypoxia issue as a Gulf issue, you know, there are a lot of non-point source contributions that come from states in Region 7. Again, plastics wells, battery recycling, and labeling associated with that. So again, I can't understate or overstate, I guess, the significance of the funding that's going to be coming from this law. And hopefully you all will be interested partners and looking to actively use that funding to reach the communities that we need to reach. Next slide, please. Okay, this list is going to grow, but the environmental justice issues are going to increase. They will be broad, you know, all agencies of government, and my slides after this talk about that, and I'll let you look through those. But this agency will be focused sharply on environmental justice and environmental equity, not only and traditionally in our urban areas that have needed help so badly, but also in our rural and agricultural communities as well, that also will need some help in terms of you know, infrastructure and in terms of environmental impacts that maybe have not quite made the radar to this point in time. We will start to look at those communities as well. So here are some of the websites. Again, I'll leave this slide deck with you so you all can reference this. This list is going to get much longer here in the coming months as we begin to laser focus on environmental justice, environmental equity. So I will stop there. And I think we may be taking questions at the end, DeAndre. If that's the case, I'll turn it over to Katie, but you let me know what you want to do.
Yes, we will take questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Thank you, Josh. Such big things happening with environmental justice at EPA. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here And
Katie, you have your notes,
okay,
your notes version up, FYI.
perfect. I will get that fixed here. See if I can. Is that better, Andrew?
That is perfect right there. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Well, it's good to be here with you this morning. As I mentioned, I'm Katie Howard, and I'm the Lead and Sustainability Advisor here at EPA Region 7. It's nice to get to know more about this group and all the important work that they are doing. I was really hoping I was going to be able to sit in on a couple sessions yesterday, but my schedule kind of blew up and I wasn't able to. So I look forward to future interactions. So today I am going to be talking about the agency's climate change priority. As we all know, President Biden has set a very ambitious climate change mitigation and adaptation agenda, a plan, and EPA is going to be playing a central role in that. And so today I wanted to touch a little bit, can't go too deep into it with just 10 minutes or so, but talk a little bit about the climate change priority here at EPA. And I too will be covering the strategic plan a bit because there's a lot of information in there that I think you guys would find interesting and valuable as climate change relates not only to the agency as a whole, but to your work. I want to talk a little bit about some of the planning efforts that are going on at EPA, specifically related to the adaptation side of the climate change priority. And then I'm going to go over some resources that you might find valuable. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions and answers to not only, help the conversation now, but to inform future engagement down the road as this priority continues to kind of evolve along the way. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the strategic plan because it really is a roadmap for accomplishing our priorities here at the agency. And as Josh mentioned, it was open for public comment and we are expecting the final version in February. You see a similar graphic here to the one Josh used because it's just a really good way to kind of show the way that the strategic plan really takes not only the agency's mission, but some of our principles and the strategies we're going to use combined with our goals and objectives to come up with the way that we are going to accomplish what we want to do over the next 4 years. So as Josh mentioned, it's pretty big that climate change is right there located in goal number 1 of this strategy. This is the first time that climate change has stood alone as its own goal in EPA's strategic plan. So we're very excited about that. And the title of the goal is to tackle the climate crisis. That's probably a phrase that you've heard, the president used and Administrator Regan here at EPA used too. And so underneath this goal, we have 3 objectives related to climate change. So the first is objective 1, and that's to reduce emissions that can cause climate change. The second one is to really accelerate resilience and adaptation to climate change. And then the third one is to think about the international aspect, because we all know that climate change does not have borders and we need to be thinking about this holistically. I've included a link to the strategic plan here in the presentation, and Andrew has these slides and can get them out to you guys. But it's really something that you might want to take a look at. But not only is climate change in goal 1 of the strategic plan, it's actually found throughout the entire document. If you search through any of these other goals, it's going to reference climate change in there a number of times. So it really is a whole of government approach and a whole of EPA approach to making sure that we are tackling this together. And you probably heard a little bit about this and how it relates to you and the pollution prevention programs from Dan Helfgott yesterday. But you might have heard from Dan that the pollution prevention part is in goal 7 there under objective 7.2 to promote pollution prevention. And if you look there in that part of the plan, you will see that one of our long-term performance goals there really is thinking about reducing the emissions and reducing pollution because of these grants that you guys are working on. So you're playing a key role in our strategic plan, and we appreciate that. Moving on to the planning piece. So we are really looking at climate adaptation planning. And so on October 7th, there was a big national release of climate action plans from across the federal family. So in Executive Order 14,008, all federal agencies were directed to develop a climate action plan. Again, this is responding to that kind of whole of a government approach that this administration is looking to take. So if there are other federal agencies that you guys work with, I would encourage you to go out either to the White House website and find those plans, or you can go to those specific agencies also and read about what they're doing related to climate change. But it really is, there's a lot going on out there from across the government. It's not just EPA who has a plan this go around. So EPA developed our plan. We again are specifically focusing on climate adaptation in the plan. And it does include 5 priority actions that the agency is going to take to increase resilience. And so kind of summarizing those for you, those are going to be that we are going to work to integrate climate adaptation into all that we do, whether it's our rules and our regulations and our policies and our guidance and our enforcement, our funding mechanisms. So we're really going to be looking to kind of make this a part of what we do on a daily basis. We're also going to be assisting our partners. So we want to assist our partners, whether that be states, tribes, nonprofits, community groups, businesses, whoever. Pretty much everybody is our partner on climate change because it's impacting everybody. We want to assist them as they plan for, adapt to, or recover from climate change impacts, and just really thinking about increasing that adaptive capacity and making everything here in the region more resilient to climate change. We're also going to make sure that we ourselves are climate ready. So we want to think about our workforce and our buildings and our operations and our procurements and our supply chain and everything, and make sure that we ourselves are ready to go and continue accomplishing our mission despite the changing climate. We are going to be working to measure and track our work here to make sure that we're doing the right things and that what we're doing is making a difference. And then we really want to be thinking about the science behind that's very important. So we're going to be identifying science needs and working to address those. So a big part of what this climate adaptation plan does is it directs all of EPA's regions and offices at headquarters to develop a climate implementation plan. So there'll be a total of 19 implementation plans because there's 10 regions and then 9 offices at headquarters that will be creating a plan. So kind of moving to that other side of the slide there, the implementation plans, work on those has started, and they're going to be finalized next summer. But along the way, there are going to be some kind of review processes and some external stakeholder and partner engagement abilities. And then what we're going to be doing is in these plans, we're really going to be addressing those 5 agency-wide priorities that I talked about. And thinking about how are we going to implement that and how are we going to kind of put the meat on the bones here and think about what we can do in our particular region to make a difference related to climate adaptation. And I believe Dan mentioned yesterday that the P2 program is looking at ways to do exactly that, right? To be a part of this process and to implement climate change into what is being done in the program. And so there's more specifics on that to come. All of that is still being kind of worked into the process. And while P2 partners need to be thinking about their work primarily as source reduction, I do think that there's ways that we can think about climate adaptation as co-benefits to the work that you are doing, both internally and externally. So internally, you might be thinking about, well, what if there's a big storm? Are some of the hazardous chemicals that I'm using here at my facility, are they protected if there's a flood or if there's a big storm, or if power is out for 3 days? Are we still going to be able to function in a safe way? And so really thinking about how resilient your own internal processes are related to climate impacts, but then also externally. We're all part of a community, whatever that community might be. And if your community is, say, experiencing a drought because of climate impacts and increasing temperatures and decreasing precipitation, you might be thinking about, okay, well, I'm already thinking about reducing my water use through my P2 grant. I can also be thinking about how that reduced water use is helping my community meet their goals as we're adapting and becoming more resilient to this changing climate. And to wrap up here with a few resources I thought you guys might appreciate knowing about. So the first is the EPA's climate change website is back and it's been updated, it's been added to. The climate indicators that are a part of this website are also updated and will continue to be updated as the science changes and new indicators have been added. So if this is something that interests you, it might be a good place to go and explore. We have also added a climate adaptation website to house the adaptation plan and these implementation plans and just a bunch of resources that are really specific to the adaptation side of climate change priority. And then I wanted to share this partnership program link. So EPA is celebrating 30 years of our partnership programs. And I thought you guys might be interested in this one because you're already thinking about pollution prevention. And there's a lot of partnership programs at EPA that touch on this, whether it's related to recycling, waste reduction, transportation, energy use, water use. There's a lot of different programs out there. So if you're already doing the pollution prevention side, there might be other ones that interest you too. So you might want to check those out. And then finally, ARC-X, which is EPA's Adaptation Resource Center. This is primarily geared towards local leaders, whether that's state or county or city leaders, and helping them get the resources they need in response to the specific climate impacts that are happening in their area. But it might be something, again, where if you guys are working with your community on things related to climate and you're looking for resources or funding opportunities, this is just another resource to know about, another tool that you can use as you're thinking about this kind of holistically throughout, as I said, your community and your businesses and your organizations. So that is what I had to share with you today. My contact information is there. I'm always happy to chat with people or answer questions, but otherwise I will turn it back over to DeAndre to lead our question and answer session.
Thanks, Katie. And thanks, Josh. So I guess we don't have any questions in the chat as of now, but are there any questions? Feel free to come on camera and ask. All right, Linnell.
Good morning. I have a question for Katie. I asked this yesterday, not yesterday, the day before yesterday at our SB Region 7 meeting. Do you guys anticipate that the GHG regulations will be coming back? Years ago we had some air regulations that impacted not only PSD, but impacted Title V potentially and minor construction. Is that going to come back? Do you see that?
I hate to not be able to answer your question, and I will definitely take it down and see what I can find more. And I'll see if DeAndre or Josh have anything to add to as some of our senior leaders at the agents or at the region. But, there's still a lot going on. There's a lot of cases out there. There's been some recent announcements on some of these court cases that are at very high levels of the court that are going to impact all of that. And I always hate being able to say, well, it's yet to be seen, but I feel like that's where we potentially are right now as we wait for some of this to get settled and to get figured out. But DeAndre and Josh, I'll yield the floor to you to see if you have anything that you want to add there.
I'll just say, I think, Katie, you're exactly right. Right now we're in the process of trying to pull together our strategy. So until we get those finalized, it'll be more to come. Maybe a couple of months down the road, we may know a lot more than we know today. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Let me just add one more thing, DeAndre, to that, and that is that historically, and in fact, I was in the AIR program when we first worked on these issues, is historically we've had challenges in terms of linking our regulations to our authorities under the law at least according to the courts. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is work on viable paths forward that are clearly linked and are defensible in a court of law. So the court decisions that Katie mentioned are a part of our analysis of where we go from here. So.
And I would say as those kind of, work their way through, as we think about future meetings with your group, we could definitely bring in some subject matter experts because it's all very detailed and technical. And I would hate to say something that's not appropriate technically, not technically sound, but we can definitely bring in other speakers as those cases get settled and we know more about what's happening. So.
Well, we have bi-monthly meetings, so that would be a really great opportunity once those things start, falling in line, those dominoes start falling. That'd be great to know and keep ahead of.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
and I appreciate that question because it's good to know, like I said, for future engagement, what you guys are interested in and what's important to you. So even if we can't answer it right now, we're committed to figuring it out in the future for you.
And I'll just say, Katie, Linnell brings up a great point, and another group that's really interested in that is the National Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, so nationalsb.org. And we have a technical subcommittee, and we have regulatory speakers almost every month, and it is very air focused under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 and Section 507. So Keith Johnson is our liaison there in the air program at Region 7. And so we would love to both from a P2 aspect on this Region 7 group, as well as the small business side, because our program works in tandem with both of those to leverage both compliance and P2. So, I did have a question for Katie. Katie, you mentioned, see if other agencies are tying into climate change. And we work a little bit with USDA, so does Iowa Waste Reduction Center, mostly from a solid waste management, waste minimization standpoint. And so are you doing any connection with USDA on climate?
We are, it's one of those things where because everybody's got one of these new plans, we're all kind of reaching out to each other and starting to talk, right? Like these plans just were released on October 7th. So now we all know what's actually in them and how we might be able to intersect. USDA has some climate hubs that are regionally focused. So we recently just met with the Midwest USDA Climate Hub. But I recognize that USDA is really big and they have a lot of different pieces beyond just the climate hub. So we are working on, interacting with our other federal sister agencies. I've met with NOAA and I've met with HHS. There's just a lot going on and happening, and we're all still working to figure out what our specific plans are going to be. But like I mentioned, a big part of this, and if you read through that climate adaptation action plan from the agency, is that whole of government approach and really making sure that our other federal partners are one of the groups that we're working with. So that will all be part of it as things come. And especially as we know more about, what's going to be included in upcoming federal budgets. And where climate change is going to fit in with some of that. And then again, as Josh mentioned, the infrastructure bill or I guess we're calling it law now. And also, I think yesterday, Dan also talked about the Build Back Better Act. And that's going to, if that passes, again, there's a lot to be seen there. There's going to also be some pieces in there. And so all of that's going to play a part into where we reach out and who we interact with and how we do so. Because combining our authorities to make more of an impact is always something that we're looking to do rather than just kind of piecemealing things along.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, and I have a couple other questions, but I'd rather yield to the group if the group has questions. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, I think, DeAndre.
That's right, Nancy.
Anybody else? Okay, otherwise I will go ahead and ask. My questions are for Josh. So, wow, lots going on there, Josh, with your presentation. And I had a few questions. One was the PFAS for small and disadvantaged entities. That was 5 billion. How do you have any, can you tell us any more about where you think, how that will be directed? Is that technical assistance? Is that product?
I don't at this point, Nancy, have any answers. Again, it was just signed by the president, I think, on Monday. And so there are special work groups within the agency that are actually spending a lot of time trying to figure out, what portion will come from headquarters assistance, what portion will go to the regions, and how will we reach out. But one thing that I will say is that the emphasis is going to be on reaching communities that maybe we wouldn't otherwise reach or we haven't frequently reached, to try and provide assistance there. So we're not going to ignore our traditional communities that we've been working with, but this will be more in addition to. So you've seen the pot of money. I tried to underscore that. Hopefully you guys got a hint at that. It's enormous, and the task in front of us is enormous. And so we will be looking at trying to run that money out in a very effective way, because I'm sure we'll be accountable to it, right? As time goes on, I'm sure there will be audits. We want to make sure that we got the most for our money, but also that the communities that are in the greatest need get the most for the money. So I don't have an answer for you yet, but I assume it would be all of the above.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I know we've got a couple of specialists in our group who are very interested and have been doing a lot of reading and research on PFAS sources. And so we have a small project with the Kansas Parks Department this year. So yeah, so
stay tuned. And I think DeAndre is a great person to stay in touch with as we go forward, because I'm sure his office or division will have a significant role in the rollout of that funding.
Okay. And then my other question was the 22.5 million to air agencies. Is that going to go directly to air agencies like KDHE, Iowa DNR, to beef up their programs? And is it going to have a 507, possibly a 507 support component?
Yeah, I can't speak to the 507 piece, but I would be surprised if that wasn't included in there. And, essentially our air agencies, with our environmental state and local partners in general, have been doing more and more with no increases, in some cases decreases in their annual funding. And so I think a part of that is just to recognize that, that they've been doing more with less, and there are additional expectations in terms of climate, in terms of environmental justice, and others that are coming down the pipe, that they will need assistance. And as much as the EPA likes to think that we make an impact, and we absolutely do, we couldn't make the impact that we want to without our state and local partners. So we absolutely have to recognize that as much work as may be coming down for us, it's multiplied multiple times when we talk about our state and local partners. So I don't know exactly about 507. I think that's a great question, but I would be surprised if it wasn't included in that.
Wow. Okay, great. Thank you.
I think we're at time, Nancy. So I appreciate, I don't know if we, if there was one final question or not, but if not, we'll turn it back over to you and Andrew, Nancy. Thanks so much for allowing us to be on the agenda this morning.
Okay, thank you so much, DeAndre and Katie and Josh. Great presentation. We could probably ask more questions, but we'll be following up. So we really appreciate it. We'll possibly ask some of you to be part of our bi-monthly meetings as a featured presenter. Just that's where we can take a little deeper dive. So great. Thank you, Josh. With that, we do have a couple of new people, at least one new person who has joined us. I want to give Matt Green a second just to introduce himself, and then David will go to you. Matt, did you want to introduce yourself? Kind of putting you on the spot there, Matt. Okay, well, I do know who Matt Green is. He's a partner in our program. Matt Green is with the Kansas Dairy Ingredients, and he is one of the Region 7P2 award winners. And so I know he's jumped on. He has actually presented at this roundtable before. I think, Lisa, it was your first year when he and his team came and presented on just the incredible work that they've done out in Western Kansas with the Kansas Dairy Ingredient. So we look forward to hearing more and more from him. But with that, I would like to turn this over to David Kozad. And David, I'll allow you to introduce yourself, and we just appreciate you so much being with us. And I'm pulling up your presentation now.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Kozad. My permanent job is as the Enforcement Division Director in Region 7. I've been doing that job for about 2 years now. Prior to that, I was the Regional Counsel in Region 7, leading the legal office for 10 years. And I've been at EPA for 30 years now. I'm currently working virtually in Washington, D.C. for the Headquarters Enforcement Office, where I'm the acting deputy there, while we're still waiting for the political appointee who will be the assistant administrator. So until that person is confirmed by the Senate, I'll be in Washington as the deputy in the National Enforcement Office. So I've got a little national perspective to offer you today about the regulatory agenda and also like where enforcement fits in all this. So that's what I thought I'd do. I'm happy to take questions at any time, or we can save it to the end. And with that, I think we can get going. Does that sound good, Nancy?
That sounds perfect. You should be seeing my screen in your presentation. I'll just ask for confirmation.
Yep. So why don't you go to the next slide? So this is, I'm going to state the obvious here, but pretty much everything that this administration is doing right now is focusing on three things: climate change, environmental justice, and emerging contaminants. Almost all the activities we're working on in the rulemaking context have to do with those three things in one form or another. And you just look at the administrator's travel schedule for the last few weeks to see, how serious we are about these things as an agency. He spent 10 days in Scotland at the Glasgow conference. Immediately upon his return, he embarked on a week-long travel trip that he's doing right now called the Journey to Justice, where he is traveling through South, visiting historically disadvantaged communities and disenfranchised communities, Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi. He's meeting with environmental justice activists, community leaders, residents, stakeholders, touring neighborhoods. So, where an administrator spends his time tells you where an agency's priorities are. And he's been working on climate and EJ. And then emerging contaminants, we'll talk about PFAS a little later, about the Pfas Roadmap, and there's a lot going on there. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about climate first. The first thing I would point out to you is words matter, right? And this administration talks about climate as the climate crisis, not just climate change, the climate crisis. And that's the lens through which I think EPA has been tasked to look at it by this executive order. There's a really ambitious goal that this administration has set of being net zero emissions by 2050. And the administration, I think, views that as essential to the future of the planet. And this the executive order tasks federal agencies across the government to take a whole of government approach to this through regulation, but also through a lot of market incentives, spending, a whole host of things to get at this global crisis. Next slide, please. So here's a few things that we've done so far and things that are still up and coming on the regulatory front. We'll get to greenhouse gases in a minute, but CO2 in a minute. But there's two other potent greenhouse gases that we have regulatory authority over. And this administration has moved to strengthen those regulations. So that the first is methane. And earlier this year, about a month ago, the administration released some new, more stringent oil and gas emission standards. Oil and gas is the number one emitter of methane. So leaks from oil and gas operations are the top source of methane. And these regs tighten the standards on those operations. Landfills are the third largest source of methane emissions. And in May, we released some new landfill emission guidelines. And then another potent greenhouse gas is hydrofluorocarbons. And there was a new law signed into effect in September that calls for an 85% reduction by 2030 in hydrofluorocarbon consumption and production in this country. So EPA is tasked with Customs and Border Patrol to work on making sure that there are no illegal imports of HFCs. This was a big problem that happened in Europe when they went into a phase down of HFCs. They saw a spike in illegal imports. So we're setting up a cross-agency task force to make sure there's no illegal imports. And then we'll be enforcing this phase down of HFCs over time. I think the estimate is that this phase down will result in a half degree of centigrade less warming over the next century, which is a lot. Both methane and HFCs are about 25 times more potent than CO2. So let's move and talk about CO2 now, where our regulatory authority is less clear. So there's two things you got to do if you're going to tackle CO2. One is transportation, cars and trucks, and the other is coal-fired power plants. And so on the transportation sector, the agency is planning to release some new, more stringent tailpipe standards for cars and trucks. By the end of this calendar year, I think the standards are at OMB in the White House being reviewed right now, and they'll probably be released pretty soon. We're also working on new mercury and air toxic standards for coal-fired power plants, which don't get at greenhouse gases directly, but one of the co-benefits of that rule will likely be a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So that brings me to probably the big question that everybody has is, what is this administration going to do about regulating CO2 emissions from coal-fired power plants? You'll recall that the Obama administration had a rule called the Clean Power Plan that was a really ambitious rule where states were tasked to look at their fleet of coal-fired power plants and come up with plans for markedly reducing CO2 emissions through a combination of things, both inside and outside the fence line. So it was a really broad rule that was going to, I think 30% reduction in CO2 emissions was the ultimate goal there. It got struck down by the Supreme Court. The Trump administration had its greenhouse gas rule, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. And it was a much narrower rule. It was going to largely ask coal-fired power plants to look at energy efficiency as a way they could reduce their CO2 emissions. That rule was vacated on January 21st. So now we have no rules, and we're back to the drawing board. And the new administration is, putting their heads together and trying to figure out how they want to go about regulating coal-fired power plants. But in the meantime, a number of states and industry have asked the Supreme Court to opine on what is EPA's authority to regulate CO2 under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. How far can EPA go? And the court just recently agreed to hear that case. pretty unusual because there's no actual rule in front of them. So they're going to just opine for EPA and tell us what we can do without ruling on any specific rule in front of them. The fact that they took it, a lot of people think they are going to rein EPA in on this and tell us we can't do anything like we had proposed under the Clean Power Plan. So we'll see. It's a wrinkle that I don't think many people saw coming. And it's a potential game changer in how we deal with greenhouse gases from power plants. It might make it clear that's what needed is legislation, not a rule. So we'll see. That is probably the biggest wait and see in the climate change world right now. Next slide. So along with climate, EJ is the other biggie. There's executive orders that touch on that as well. So I've been doing enforcement in EPA for 30 years. And until now, I have never seen an executive order where the president told EPA to go enforce. But in this executive order, President Biden did exactly that. He said the administrator of EPA shall strengthen enforcement of environmental laws and pollution that has disproportionate impact on underserved communities. So we have our clear marching orders from the president. We are to go help disadvantaged communities. This executive order also created a program called Justice 40, which you probably have heard of. It says that federal investments should be structured so that 40% of the benefits from those investments flow to disadvantaged communities. And it's in programs like energy efficiency, clean energy, clean transit, housing, workforce training, clean water infrastructure, legacy pollution cleanup, a wide range of programs. We now have to make sure that 40% of the benefits of those programs flow to disadvantaged communities. So the Office of Management and Budget and CEQ are setting up the structure for that program. And it's not totally in place yet. There's a lot of definitions that have to be finalized as to what exactly is a disadvantaged community. How do you measure benefits? What is a covered investment? All that's being worked out in pretty rapid fashion, I think. A whole host of EPA's projects and programs are covered by this. It's kind of a game changer to say that to ensure that 40% of federal monies flow to certain communities. It makes environmental justice real, more than a paper exercise. Justice 40, I think, makes sure that it's real. Next slide, please. So Administrator Regan took office in April, and on his second or third day, I think we all got a memo from him about environmental justice. He's deeply committed to it. And one of the things he directed all of us to do was strengthen enforcement of violations of Cornerstone laws, both environmental statutes and then significantly civil rights laws. It's an area where EPA has not typically been very active enforcing Title VI. In our making sure that recipients of our grants and other monies are not discriminatory in how they use those dollars. We get complaints all the time about that. We haven't been very active in investigating and acting on those. I expect that this administration will be much more active in Title VI. Next slide, please. And then, no clearer sign that stronger enforcement is back than the agency's just released strategic plan. Goal 3 is of 7. There's 7 goals. Goal 3 is to enforce environmental laws, and contrast that with the agency's last strategic plan, where you couldn't find enforcement in it at all. So this is a sharp, marked difference. And we'll talk about some of the things we're doing to carry out this in just a second. Next slide. So one of the things we're committed to as an agency is where a community is facing a serious health threat is early action to help them. And I've got a few examples for you from the last few months. We issued Emergency Clean Air Act orders for a refinery in the Virgin Islands called the Lime Tree Refinery. We also issued an Emergency Clean Air Act to a paperboard and pulp manufacturing facility in South Carolina called New Indy. Those orders are historically very rare. In the history of the agency, we've only done 10. In the last 6 months, we've done 2. So quite a contrast there. The administrator has been very clear with us where people are facing a serious threat, we need to get in there and take action right away to help them. We're doing the same thing with the drinking water. We've issued emergency orders in the East St. Louis area in Cahokia Heights. The issue there was potential contamination from raw sewage overflows of the drinking water system. Clarksburg, West Virginia, where there were lead problems from lead service lines. And then Benton Harbors, which you may have seen was featured on CBS News for almost a week, where another serious lead problem. That is an 80% African-American population, large, low-income population, and serious problems with lead in drinking water. So we're going to be looking more for these kind of things, and where people are drinking contaminated water or breathing air that's potentially a serious problem, I think we're going to step in and act a lot quicker than we used to be. Next slide. So how are we going to carry out the environmental justice program in the enforcement arena beyond just taking early action? There's a memo that has come out from Malika that will give you some idea of the direction. The first is we're going to put more of our enforcement inspections into disadvantaged communities. We've set a goal in our strategic plan of having 45% of our inspections this year in disadvantaged communities, and that increases next year to 55%. So over half of our inspections are going to be in disadvantaged and overburdened communities. That's boots on the ground in communities where people have been facing overburden from pollution for decades. That will result inevitably in more enforcement actions in those communities and reductions in pollution. So this is probably the single clearest way the enforcement program can help with the environmental justice issue is just being more present and putting more of our resources there. Our inspection program is part of the Justice 40 initiative, so we'll be tracked and measured by OMB on how we're doing on this. Second thing is when we find violations, resolving them in ways that provide real benefit, tangible benefits to the communities who have been impacted. So we're going to be, when we're seeking to settle cases, we're going to be trying to get things like fence line monitoring, having the companies set up websites and making transparent the results of that community monitoring so the community can track in real time what's happening. Seeking through mitigation and projects to have companies go above and beyond compliance and do what we call super compliance. So those are the kind of things we're going to be seeking in settlements to help communities. And then the last thing we're going to do is engage with communities more. And so we're not really very good at this. Typically, we view our dealings as between us and a company and a confidential negotiation settlement. We historically have not sought community input ahead of time as to what the community would like to see in a settlement, nor really once we get a settlement, do we engage too much with the community to let them know, what's been done under the settlement. We typically do a press release and move on, frankly. And we're looking to really change that. We're going to try and engage with communities and ahead of time when we see some violations that are impacting them. Be transparent with communities about those violations, engage with them about what they might like to see in a settlement, And then once we do have a settlement, we're going to make sure that there is a way for the community to track the progress that is being made as a result of that settlement. The other thing we're going to start doing is posting our inspection reports so that the public can see what are the results of an inspection in my community. You know, other places have done this for years. Think about your local food inspections at restaurants. You know, you read about the results of those in your newspaper or on Facebook or wherever. We haven't done that historically, but I think we're going to start posting our inspection reports. So if you live near somewhere, you can see what we found during the inspection. Next slide. Can't talk about environmental justice without talking about tackling lead. It is still lead poisoning of children is still a big problem in this country. And the agency just released its draft lead strategy, which is a comprehensive sort of holistic strategy that has us going into communities where we think there is a lead problem and looking holistically at what is the source of that problem. Is it lead in drinking water? Is it lead paint? Is it lead in soil? Is it air emissions from some kind of industrial facility? And then once we figure out what the problem is, bring in whatever resources are available and necessary to tackle that problem. We have done a little bit of this in some places through geographic initiatives, but it's been on a kind of a pilot basis. We haven't done it widespread across the agency. And this plan commits us to doing it. That is how we're going to tackle lead, period. In the past, we've taken more of a one source approach where we had a Superfund site, for example, that had lead contaminated soil. We would go in and tackle that lead contaminated soil, but we typically didn't look. Is there also a problem with lead service lines? Or are there nearby air emissions? So now I think when we go in, we're going to be looking across all the potential sources and then bringing a holistic approach, including other government agencies as needed to deal with it. If lead paint in public housing is a problem, then we'll bring in HUD, for example. And we're going to work with the local governments, the health agencies. The other big piece on lead, well, there's two other big pieces. One is science. There's emerging science that the lead cleanup standards in soil maybe ought to be lower than they are now. And that the blood lead level that is used as a cause of concern ought to be lower than it is. So there's probably the standards that we're looking at for addressing lead are going to be lower than they have historically. So that's one thing. And public awareness is the other. I think about lead a little bit like I think about asbestos. You know, there was a time where people didn't hesitate to hire people who weren't trained in asbestos to do work in their house or tackle it themselves because it wasn't really widespread known that asbestos was a serious problem. That changed over time, and now nobody thinks about hiring anybody but a certified asbestos person to come in and tackle your asbestos work, and people don't do it on their own, very rarely. We're not there yet with lead, and particularly lead paint. Getting there, but we're not there yet. And until we get to the point where the consumer asks anybody who's coming into their residence, are you certified to do lead paint abatement? Until we get there and nobody hires people unless they're certified, we're going to continue to have a problem. And until, frankly, do-it-yourselfers take it seriously, we're going to continue to have a problem. So awareness is a big part of tackling the lead problem, and it's a big part of this lead strategy we released. Next slide, please. I think I missed the last presentation, but I think you guys heard about some of the money. With this administration, and this is the way it's very different than the last couple of administrations, we're not just looking at tackling problems through regulation enforcement, we're putting lots of dollars into it. The American Rescue Plan has $100 million for monitoring in EJ communities, community monitoring. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has $60 billion going towards a host of things. I'll walk you through in a minute, but maybe Josh already did this. And of course, the big unknown is what's going to be in the bill that Better Act, which could even dwarf what's in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. But this gets at a host of things related to both environmental justice and climate through these spending plans and emerging contaminants as well. Next slide.
And yes, just to answer your question, Josh did go through this and very similar type of slide here.
Okay, then we can probably skip this because I don't want to be repetitive for you all. Maybe go to the next one. So Josh talked to you about the Superfund site money, school bus electrification money, and then of course the big one, the 50 billion for water.
Yeah, we didn't hear any detail. And Josh, if you're still on, correct me if I'm wrong. So emerging contaminants, hearing more on that, I think. And we didn't necessarily hear any detail on the 5.4 billion for waste, but we did hear about air and certainly P2.
Okay, so on the waste side, there's about $3.5 billion for Superfund, and the goal there is to clean up a backlog of sites that are ready to be cleaned up, but the money just hasn't been there. The Superfund program, the tax that funded that program expired years ago, and so the agency's been dependent on annual funding from Congress, and it just has not been enough to keep up with the number of sites that need to be cleaned up. So the Superfund program has been, moving forward, evaluating sites and picking remedies for them. And they've got a whole bunch of them that are ready to go, but they just need funding. And this money largely takes care of that. I think there is an inventory of 60 or 70 sites across the country that are just waiting to go. And this money is going to kick that off and get them running. And a big chunk of these are located in historically disadvantaged and overburdened communities. Same thing for brownfields. If DeAndre's on, he probably knows a lot more about this than me because he runs this program in Region 7. So that's about $1.5 billion. So that's $5 billion right there that is going to go to clean up legacy pollution that has been around for decades. On the water side, the lead pipe service line replacement is huge. I think the estimate is there's between 6 and 10 million lead service lines still in this country. That was the problem in Benton Harbor. That was the problem in Flint. It's a problem in a lot of places, and we don't even know where they all are. Start there, and so we're going to use this money to go find those lead service lines and replace them. The emerging contaminants, that's PFAS money for both drinking water and wastewater systems to sample for PFAS. You can't pick up a trade journal about the environment without reading a PFAS article anymore. It's the next coming big thing. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, the Build It Better Act has more money for most of these things. So we'll see what ends up coming out of that. But I really do think it could end up making those monies look small, depending on how it turns out. All right, so PFAS, we started to talk about it. The agency released its Pfas Roadmap probably a month ago. And it's an ambitious agenda on the regulatory side. So we've committed to promulgating an MCL for PFAS under the Safe Drinking Water Act. As you probably know, we currently have a health advisory level. It's not an enforceable standard. It's 70 parts per trillion. We're going to promulgate now an enforceable MCL under the Safe Drinking Water Act. We are also going to promulgate fluent guidelines for PFAS under the Clean Water Act. We're going to designate it as a hazardous substance under CERCLA, which will allow, sites contaminated where groundwater is contaminated from foam from firefighting, et cetera, to be handled under the CERCLA program. And then we're going to change the RCRA regulations so that it's designated as a hazardous constituent, which means that states who run RCRA corrective action programs will be able to deal with PFAS through their programs. And then the last big thing in the PFAS roadmap, of course, is the science, which is going to have to move rapidly if we're going to be able to promulgate all these rules. Not clear yet at all how these rules are going to be structured, if they're going to be, contaminant by contaminant by contaminant, or if we're going to deal with them as a class. It's really tricky business, but it's essential that we move forward on these rules. There's also legislation pending on PFAS that could sort of speed up the timeline for all these things, or do some of these things through legislation instead of rulemaking. So that bears watching as well. On the enforcement side, we don't really have enforceable standards yet for PFAS, but we do have these emergency authorities. And if we become aware of situations where there is an emergency condition due to PFAS in drinking water or PFAS in inhalation or ingestion exposure, we will step in and deal with it under our emergency authorities. There's lots of difficult questions embedded in these rulemakings, like the hazardous substance designation, for example. There's some tricky liability issues there because the FAA mandated use of these PFAS containing foams. And so is it really fair to hold an airport or a city or a state who runs an airport liable under CERCLA when for releases of PFAS from firefighting foam, when the FAA required them to use that foam? That's a difficult question. There's some difficult liability questions for wastewater treatment plants that may have PFAS. So there's legislative fixes being considered for those things too. The agency's looking at what we might be able to do to address some of these liability questions. PFAS is the big thing to watch, I think, in years ahead in terms of the next big wave of rulemakings. That's going to have impact everywhere because these substances are everywhere. And the science on the health impacts of them is growing, that they are more serious impacts than we had thought. Next slide, please. We still have the same national compliance initiatives that we had when I talked to you all a year ago. They haven't changed, but what we're doing with them now is putting an EJ overlay on them. And in how we're implementing these compliance initiatives, we're trying to focus on advancing the administration's environmental justice goals. So, for example, chemical accident reduction, this is looking at the 112R risk management program and facilities that are handle large quantities of extremely hazardous substances and how they store and handle them, how they are ready for emergencies, et cetera, et cetera. So in the past, we've been looking a lot at fertilizer distributors. We're probably going to shift away from that now. Those are largely in rural areas. And we're going to probably look more at places like food processing facilities that have large low-income and minority, both worker populations and communities around them. Think about your meatpacking plants and those kind of things. Also chemical manufacturing and chemical storage and distribution facilities that are located in EJ areas. So we're going to shift the focus and the targeting of our work in that program towards those kind of facilities. Mobile sources is something we're going to invest more in. This is the aftermarket defeat devices. People who sell and install software or hardware that is designed to basically turn off your emission controls. If you think about the highway grid in this country and where there's traffic problems, it's often in highways that run through low-income communities. So reducing emissions in those areas is an EJ issue, which is why we're going to focus on the mobile sourcing. Drinking water, there are one of the most common root causes of drinking water problems is small systems that are underfunded because they are in communities with a large percentage of low-income people. They therefore have a low rate base. They can't afford to maintain their system. They can't keep and hire qualified operators. So drinking water is a big EJ issue. Same thing for NPDS, actually, in the wastewater side. It's not just an enforcement thing. We would bring in enforcement resources to deal with it, but as you saw, there's going to be a lot of federal dollars available through the state SRF programs to deal with these problems. We have a compliance advisors program that we hope to triple the size of it, where if a system largely has an operation and maintenance problem, and doesn't need a big infrastructure upgrade, but needs some help in how to run its system. We've got a program where we send compliance advisors to work with that system and help them figure out how in the long run sustainably they can operate and maintain it and stay in compliance. So we're doing the same national compliance initiatives, but putting an EJ focus on all of them. Next slide. Just a little bit about COVID and how it's impacted how we do things. When COVID first hit, we stopped inspecting, period. In March of 2020, we immediately put a hard stop on doing all in-person inspections. We started shifting to doing offsite compliance monitoring, doing things through information requests, talking with facilities. We tried some video inspections where the facility walked around with a video camera, and that's how we did the inspection. And that's largely how we went for a year. And then we started getting back in the field slowly. And we were planning by the fall to be back normal, and then Delta hit, and that set us back a bit. But I think our plan now is come January to be back doing in-person inspections as we were pre-COVID. And I think the states are in the same place. They're going to be back doing their inspections just like they had been pre-pandemic. If they aren't already there, some of them are already there. One thing we saw during COVID was a big jump in our work dealing with disinfectants that make claims that they can deal with COVID. Those are regulated under FIFRA. And so you have to get them, if you have a disinfectant you want to get to market, you have to register it. The claims that you make on it have to be valid. And we saw a lot of products being rushed to market that were not registered, that were making claims about their effectiveness in dealing with COVID that weren't verifiable. And so we tried our best to get those products off the shelves as quickly as we could, while still making sure that the disinfectants that were legit got on the shelves as quickly as they could. And so that was a big chunk of what we did during the early days of COVID. It was an interesting thing we didn't see coming. Next slide.
And David, we just have a few minutes left.
Okay, I'm almost done. So I think I've covered this stuff. One more thing. Next slide. Just a few other things that are potentially of interest. One thing under the RCRA program we've seen is that there are a fair number of facilities registered as small quantity generators who are not small quantity generators. The amount of waste they generate and send to treatment and storage and disposal facilities actually makes them a large quantity generator. And as you know, large quantity generators are subject to more stringent requirements because they generate large quantities. So they have enhanced training requirements and those kinds of things. So one thing we're doing is making sure that people who self-identify as small quantity generators are really, and if they're not, we're going to bring an enforcement case to get them to get the proper status. We've seen a fair number of significant problems with quote unquote recycling operations, businesses that started up with a good intention of recycling things like computer monitors, treated seed. I could go on. There's digesters that turned out where the recycling process turned out to not work because it wasn't adequately designed and tested before they went into full operations, and they ended up being essentially large Superfund sites. So we're trying to look at how we can prevent those things from happening. Coal combustion residuals is a big looming thing. There are about 700 coal ash impoundments in landfills across the country. There are rules that require how they need to monitor the groundwater and close that are in effect. They have not been enforced in the prior administration. This administration is going to look to enforce those rules. So that's a big coming thing. With that, I think I'll stop.
Okay, David, thank you so much. Great information. We're hearing a lot of really good technical information today. Are there questions for David? We have just a few minutes and then we're going to take a short break. If you turn your camera on to ask the questions, that is very helpful.
Kind of rapid fire. I covered a lot of ground in a hurry there.
You did cover a lot of ground. And I was really, I had not, believe it or not, as much as we've heard about environmental justice over the last couple of days in some trainings, I have not heard of Justice 40. So that's
well,
something I'm gonna look into and
Yeah.
research a little bit.
Yeah, you go to the OMB website.
Okay,
It's kind of a game changer. Like I said, you know, past administrations have talked about environmental justice. And I'm just going to be really candid here. It was mostly talk, I think. I never saw a lot actually happen. And there were a lot of papers written and a lot of plans written, but real on the ground change, I didn't see. This feels very different this time. And Justice 40 is going to make it different because it's sending federal programs into these communities.
okay,
You know, we're changing our enforcement program in a way that we have not changed.
right, right. And so I see there's a few people who have their camera on. Jennifer, did you want to go first?
I didn't have a question. I just was gonna just verbally relay the comment that I put in chat, just that I just really appreciate your presentation. I got a lot out of it and it was incredibly helpful. So thank you for that.
Good, I'm glad.
Linnell, did you have a question?
Well, I mean, he was answering a lot of it. It was about the Justice 40 and do you anticipate that is, you know, for funding, future funding with EPA grants across the board, whether that's 2 grants or EE grants, environmental justice grants, that those will all, you know, have some component in it and a requirement that the grantee demonstrate that 40% or that close to that amount would be, you know, used to serve underserved communities or working with industry in underserved or near underserved communities that are impacted by that industry?
So exactly how it'll get implemented in each program is I'm not sure. You know, the grant programs themselves writ large will be required to, for the most part, ensure that 40% of the benefits flow to those communities. How they do that, you know, and how that translates down to individual grantees, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, it's just something
I do think though that a
a
lot of these dollars that are coming from the Infrastructure Act, for example, are going to be covered by Justice 40. So that 60 billion, a lot of those dollars are going to go directly to disadvantaged communities. And then there's a really big definitional question about what is a disadvantaged community. And OMB is, I think we expect them sometime in the next few months to have a government-wide definition of what is a disadvantaged community. Right now, EPA uses EJ Screen, which you may or not be familiar with. And that is our screening tool. It's not ours. We look at other factors outside that, but that's our starting point, right? And that's a very publicly available tool. You can go on EPA's website and use EJ Screen yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I just wondered if, you know, as part of all of this, if maybe that tool is going to get updated with more accurate or more specific data.
Yeah, because it's not a perfect tool, right?
Right.
You know, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it uses a combination of demographic data and environmental data to come up with an index for you. And the environmental data is skewed. There's 11 different indices, 4 or 5 of them are air. One's lead paint, one is the number of Superfund sites in the census area, one is the number of RIF facilities, one is the number of R7P facilities. There's no drinking water in it, right?
Right.
But because it's so heavily on air, it skews towards urban areas. Rural areas just will not trip EJ screen as much as urban areas. So it tends to skew towards air and towards urban areas and away from rural areas, which is why we don't rely on it exclusively, you know, because I think there are overburdened populations in rural areas too, especially in our part of the country, right?
Yes.
I think I saw in Josh's slide that it was either 1 billion. I don't know, the zeros are making my eyes roll back in my head, but just for the EJ screen, it was called out in his funding breakdown, and then other EJ analytic tools. So it sounds like there's a fair amount of money to help with those tools so that as technical assistance providers, you know, we can use those and identify partners.
The big unknown is I don't know what the future of EJ Screen will be once there is a government-wide tool that we are all supposed to use, right? So because OMB is going to come up with its own thing here.
Well, great. I have another question, but I'm going to hold it just because we've run into our break. And if there are any other questions, I don't see any other than everyone, you know, saying thank you so much, David. That really great presentation. We've had great speakers this morning, and so thanks to Andrew for securing them, and David taking time out of your busy schedule because I know you're on assignment. And we'll claim you as Region 7 as long as we can. And so we do appreciate it. And if there's other questions that come up, we'll hit you up with an email.
Yeah. You go ahead and send that. If you have a question already, you can email it to me.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, David.
Yep. Talk to you guys later.
We're going to take, is it all right, Andrew, if we just take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back with the award presentations? Or would you prefer to? We can delay the break if you prefer.
Well, we have Jenny and Matt on now. So, Jenny and Matt, do you have obligations that you need to be at?
Nope, I'm good.
I'm good as well, Andrew.
Okay.
So if you guys need a break, go ahead.
Let's do that then.
We're right about at the halfway point. Yeah. Why don't we take when we come back at 10:15?
Yeah, at 10:15. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
couple more minutes to this break. Bruce or Jeff, are either of you back?
Yes.
Never left.
Okay, never left. I ran out really quick. I figure if people are home, it's a little quicker for them. I'm at my office, but you know, and Linnell's on here too. I was kind of chatting with her about it, but they talked about the EJ overlap with food manufacturing. And one of the things that I've wondered about is the refrigeration leaks. And if you guys are working with that at all in your program with your food and beverage manufacturing, how much of an issue it is, or they even want to approach it.
We have not had a lot of interest here in Nebraska in that. What I've pondered with our larger food manufacturers may really be some of the training for the workers on just both things that are helpful to the workers to reduce waste, but also training that concurrently enhances safety. That's one of the areas I've kind of pondered might be kind of to thread that needle where you're not threatening the company, but accomplishing EG. I don't know. I'm really curious to hear, you know, with other programs, what they think might be opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the times that we've worked with refrigeration has been at the company's request. You know, a lot of times though, when we do compressor projects, we really work on getting them set up with a maintenance program. And something like that can help them get started with looking at the refrigeration, although it's, you know, a slightly different issue.
I provided a link to an OSHA tool. I used to do process safety management, and really kind of that falls into that arena a little bit.
Yeah.
Leak
This
detection, leak prevention for those systems.
This kind of leads to one of the challenges I suspect we may have as programs. And I hadn't really thought of this until now, but it may be some of the things that are EJ focused are more on the kind of worker safety, whereas what the companies want may be more essentially waste reduction and cost savings. And that's where I'm really going to be kind of curious from the EPA, how do we kind of juggle that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see that as an issue.
Well, we'll continue this conversation another time so that Andrew, we can be respectful to the next section. And Andrew, thank you again so much for putting this together. We really, really appreciate it. We think it's really important to honor our awardees and hear more about what they've done. So it's pretty cool. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Don't thank me, Nancy. Really thank the awardees for all I did was send an email. So really appreciate Matt and Jenny jumping on with us today. As we talked about yesterday, for 2021, we made 3 award selections. And we're fortunate to have 2 of these folks on with us today, Matt Green from Kansas Dairy Ingredients and Jenny Trent from the Iowa Waste Reduction Center. The third awardee was Doherty Steele. I believe DeAndre gave a little bit of background on them as well, and would also encourage folks to check out the Midwest Environmental Compliance Conference, his website. I believe they have a recording up where we did another virtual honoree session and message during that first day, where we shared a little bit more about the awardees. And there's also some press releases that we did during P2 week back in September to announce our recipients for this year. So I'm trying to think of the order that, why don't we, Matt or Jenny, I'm not sure if you have slides. If you don't, you know, there's really no prescriptive format for this. Just wanted to give you an opportunity to share more about your work, both for this project, and Matt, I know this is kind of a continuation of several years here, and also several awards that you've received from us. So just, I guess, just a quick reminder for folks that, these awards, as we're talking about awards, these are non-monetary awards, strictly recognition based, but, we've been, Region 7's been one of the, has been the only region to have a P2 awards program up until this year. And so, again, we feel, encouraged to have other regions now taking up this mantle too, and adopting other awards programs in their regions, as it's really a way to highlight a lot of the great P2 work going on. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt. I see you on video, so why don't I turn it over to you first?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. We're of course very honored to receive this year's award, and I appreciate the invite to tell a brief story. So I have about 4 to 5 slides that I can talk for a few minutes on, if that's okay if I share my screen.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks,
Thanks, Matt.
So we'll just kind of jump right into it. Name of our company is Kansas Dairy Ingredients. Just kind of a brief introduction of who we are. We were founded in 2012, so we're a relatively new company to southwestern Kansas. We are a privately held company. Our headquarters is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Between the 2 locations in Hugoton, Kansas, where our state-of-the-art manufacturing facility is, we have about 110 employees. What we do at the facility is we manufacture various liquid dairy ingredients that go into ice cream mix, processed cheese, natural cheese, and then we do some small artisan scale cheese and butter currently at the facility. I think what's really exciting about the company is that currently right now we have a 90,000 square foot cheese manufacturing facility under construction in southwestern Kansas. That will produce about 150,000 pounds of cheese per day and about 50,000 pounds of butter per week. So that's exciting, and that'll come on in commission in Q1 2022, so right around the corner. So kind of wanted to maybe just jump into maybe, what our vision is for sustainability. And, there it is right there. I'm not going to read it to you guys. That's been our vision since we embarked on a sustainability program probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And we continue to, look for opportunities and relationships and partners that, share the same vision as we do. So this is a pretty important initiative that I had on behalf of the company and my team. So, but let's talk a little bit about, the conservation effort and what led to us earning the 2021 P2 award. Back in 2017, Kansas Dairy Ingredients made a phase 1 investment to install a fully scaled treatment plant. At that time, it was about a $7 million investment, included an anaerobic digester and aeration tank to handle about 150,000 gallons of water a day. After that was up and going, we still didn't have an outlet for the treated water, so we continued to discharge 100% of our treated water to the city of Hugoton, Kansas. They've always been a good partner of ours, but we just saw a better opportunity for the use of the water, as most of it was being placed into a evaporation pond, 75% of it, and the balance 25% of it was used to irrigate a small field of corn. It was just enough water for the city to. It's the amount of water the city needed to get rid of on an annual basis that didn't account for evaporation. So we just looked at the opportunity and we go, there's an opportunity to do something really neat here and do something really neat with the environment. So we embarked on an effort, and we identified a local family farmer in 2018 who had land adjacent to the plant about a mile south, who was irrigating with well water on two quarter sections or 2 circles of land. Particular irrigation well was mature. It probably been in service for probably 20 years or better. And the water was, water output was in gradual decline. So in order for this, this land was eventually going to become dry land, of course, and, would have a substantial decrease in crop production. So we had, concerted efforts, concerted discussions, identified a pretty sound partner. So late in 2018, we constructed our own 40 million gallon irrigation pond and force main. And then we added another $1.5 million investment into our sustainability initiative, surrounding water. So once we got the pond up and running in 2019, we went ahead and irrigated 62 acre feet of water, or nearly 20 million gallons. We followed that up in 2020 because milk production increased at the plant. And really what we do at the plant is we extract water out of the milk to reduce freight costs and to produce ingredients that the customers want. So an uptick in milk increase resulted in 2020 irrigating 87 acre feet, or nearly 28 million gallons of water. I don't have my 2021 numbers yet. I was going to include them here, but we're still tabulating those. But it looks like in 2021, we did probably close to about 90 million acre feet, or 90 acre feet, of water. So about the same as we did in 2020. So over the 2 growing seasons, we've irrigated 48 million gallons of water that has been a direct replacement of well water. And the real interesting story about this is that the farmer grows corn silage on these 2 circles. And we were able to align him with the local dairy farmer. And that local dairy farmer who supplies milk to the plant went ahead and bought that silage and continues to buy that silage off of those 2 circles. So it's a really unique story because the water's been used 3 times. The first, step was, 1, we water the cow at the dairy, it produces its milk. We transport the water and the milk to the dairy plant. We extract the water, we clean it up, turn it into potable water, and then use it to clean our plant. And then we discharge it, treat it, then it ends up in our irrigation pond where we irrigate it and grow corn for cows. So just kind of a neat little sustainability story that I just wanted to share quickly. So just the last slide I have, the future. As I mentioned on the first slide, we're going to commission a large scale cheese plant here next quarter. And that's going to generate another 54 million gallons of water annually. So we're in the process of a $1.1 million project to upgrade our current infrastructure to process that 54 million gallons of water. And along with continued permitting and the acquisition of land, we're going to be able to irrigate that 54 million gallons of water starting next year, which will add to the 40 that we've irrigated over the past 2 years. So that's our story. I thank you for the time. If there's any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Does
welcome.
anybody have any questions for Matt right off?
Hey, Matt, Nancy
Hi, Nancy.
Larson. Wow, this is so awesome because not only will building that new plant in Western Kansas, obviously help you, but I know we've talked and helped calculate for you before some of the transportation emission reductions that you've had due to your process changes. So you'll have all that transportation reduction and air emissions. So let's be sure that we help you account for that. And one of the things that we're always looking for, and since we've kind of worked with you since 2017, is we're always looking for a match to our grant. And it's something we'll be talking to Andrew about later, but and this team, but you're a great resource for that. And
Absolutely.
So we'll Linnell Ladd or myself will be following up with you. But I just really want to congratulate you on this award. And
thank you.
And I appreciate the fact that, gosh, since we were first introduced to you and the work that you've been doing in Western Kansas with the 3 dairies, And I went out there with an ag agent from K-State who said, you've got to see this stuff, Nancy. And so you guys have just made giant steps every year. There's just no end to what you're doing. So congratulations and thank you for all that you've done.
Yep. Thank you for the kind words. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Matt,
Great.
this is Bruce Dvorak from the University of Nebraska. Really neat project. Really
Thank you.
impressed by that. I wanted to, just on a different note, ask if I might be able to talk with you another time. I've got a grad student on a non-P2 project who's been working with small communities in Nebraska, essentially putting together case studies of the life cycle benefits of doing essentially what you're doing. So I'd love to see if we could work with you to build a case study. And the interesting thing we're finding is just for the community as a whole, this also compared to the other options from a greenhouse gas standpoint, if you can reduce the construction for the wastewater treatment, and that's what you've been doing, kind of showing how the benefits come in there. So I thought I'd just give you a plug for that to see if I could contact you and get a little information, and maybe we could put another case study together on what you're doing so other ag producers feel more comfortable with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to help you out, Bruce.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's what this roundtable is for, is making those connections. So
That's
thank you
right.
both. And I'll just add very quickly that we actually gave another EPA gave another presentation this week, just on the 16th at the Missouri Recycling Association conference. And just sharing some pollution prevention and sustainable materials management program updates. And you know, one thing, I think DeAndre referenced this in his talking points yesterday, but you know, we have a new recycling strategy out that's pursuing more circular economy format and framework. And Matt, I think, you know, the project that you guys have undertaken here over the last couple of years really speaks to that, you know, circular approach,
Yes.
Closed loop approach. And so that's fantastic. Looking further upstream again at these ways that we can, you know, reduce our impact downstream. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Andrew.
All right, Jenny, are you with us?
Yep, hi.
We are.
Got my-
Fantastic.
I got my screen ready to share.
Yeah, feel free to share and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Oops. This one. Okay, so tell me.
You're good. We can see your screen now.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Whoops.
All right. Oh, is that
hold
not
on?
working
Now it's just a blue background.
Okay. This one.
You can see the slides. It's just not in. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. First of all, Andrew, I want to thank you specifically and EPA Region 7 for the P2 award. We're just so honored to have received it and super proud of our work. So thank you for the recognition. Okay, so the Iowa Green Brewery certification. I know a lot of you have heard about this project or the program, and we started it a couple years ago. I would say maybe 7 years ago. So basically, when we started the brewery project, we had seen a decline in the number of manufacturer clients that were contacting us for assistance. And, you know, with fewer environmental regulations, less enforcement, we saw our numbers go down. So we decided to look at other industries to try to come up with an industry specific approach. And we found the craft brewing industry was exponentially growing across the country and in Iowa. So First of all, I will just take a step back for any of you who don't know who we are. We're the Iowa Waste Reduction Center. We're at the University of Northern Iowa, and we are funded through the Groundwater Protection Act that was formed in 1987. We get a portion of landfill tipping fees to try to help small businesses with environmental impact and need. So we help with compliance, we help with pollution prevention initiatives, and we also train military painters to paint more efficiently. So then that'll get us back to the brewery project and beer. You know, we saw rapid growth across the state of Iowa. And so we surveyed 17 Iowa breweries, asking them about environmental initiatives and what impact they believe that particular initiatives have. So for example, putting strip curtains on your cooler doors, your walk-in refrigerator doors, does that have a big impact or a small impact? So we gauged their needs, the impacts of different practices, and then we created a scoring matrix to walk into a brewery and to audit them for their environmental practices, and then score them and award them with a certification. Basically, the 17 breweries that we had in the beginning helped us identify a way in which we could equally serve large breweries and small breweries, and their resources would not have an impact on the scoring. So that was really important to us. So we presented in 2016 at the annual Brewers Conference called IBES, and we rolled out this program when a local brewery was just expanding into a brand new, or not brand new, but a historic building, the old Wonder Bread factory. When they expanded into the Wonder Bread factory, they allowed us a seat at the table with the developers and the contractors. And so one of the things that we recommended that Single Speed do is sub-meter all of their water so that they can take a look at water usage in the tap room versus the brew house versus the bathrooms and kitchens. So that was really important way that they can track their water, which they did do. So we take a look at energy efficiency, water quality and conservation, environmental management, and solid waste and inventory control. Those are the 4 areas that we look at when we go into a brewery. We go to a brewery for initial audit. We do a walkthrough. We take a look at all of their practices, and then we give them a recommendations report, which lists different ways that they can increase their score. They could be bronze, gold, platinum, or silver, sorry, bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. So basically what we do for the brewery is we contact the local media. We send out a press release when they're ready to be certified. They get these cool little growler coolers that you see on the screen, window clings that say their level of achievement for the Iowa Green Brewery certification. And we push it out on social media and give them a certificate. Some of the cool things.
Jenny,
yeah.
Just really quick, I don't think your slides are advancing. We're still on your introductory slide.
Oh, sorry.
If you are advancing.
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I'm sorry. Ugh. Okay. Here's the bet. So we're at best practices. This is Single Speed Brewing right here that you see on your screen. And then this is the inside of Single Speed Brewing. Some of the cool things that they did was reuse a lot of the building. So these old doors were in the original building. Single Speed has a huge array of solar panels on their roof as well. They had to be really careful because it's a historic building. So they couldn't change the outside appearance of the building at all. So that's one of the things they did. Sub-metered and then installed solar panels. And then they did a lot of reuse and reclamation of materials. And then there's Big Grove Brewery and Tap Room in Iowa City, one of the cool breweries that we helped. This brewery is amazing. They have all permeable pavers in their back patio. They had to remove a bunch of trees. They have a waterway behind them. They had to remove a bunch of trees when they built their building. So they replanted all the trees that they had to remove in other spots. They had a old speaker drive to create their stage. So they were repurposing some speakers in kind of a cool way. One of the really cool things Big Grove Brewery also has is an infuser, and an infuser actually, it's a really efficient way to brew beer. You use less water and less ingredients because the process of getting flavor out of the ingredients is much more intense. So Big Grove did invest in an infuser to save water and ingredients. And then we have Seven Hills Brewing and Franklin Street Brewing. Franklin Street Brewing, one of the cool things they do is they reuse processed water, except for they have a closed loop system, so they never have new water. They have a great big tank that they wheel in and out of refrigeration. And so they just basically reuse this water for heating and cooling during the brewing process. And then Seven Hills Brewing has reused a bunch of materials as well. These are just a few of the examples. Reclaimed Rails is a brewery that reused part of the log ride at Adventureland theme park for their deck. Pivo Brewery, as you see here, reuses grain bags and fabrics. They try to reuse textiles. And then some of the things that we're looking forward to is the National Consortium of Environmental Service Providers for Breweries, other industry certification programs, and content creation. And then if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I do have one more thing to say about the brewery project. We've certified through 30 breweries so far. Next week, we're going to be at 2 more. And I just wanted to let you know that we've had probably 6 or 7 states contact us interested in this project and wanting to replicate it. And so we've worked with some of these states to try to get a brewery project in their state. And so if anyone is interested in implementing the brewery project in your state, we'd be happy to help. The only thing that we ask is that we get credit on the documents that we created. Our logo and the project is copyrighted, but we would be happy to come to your state, do a walkthrough at a couple of breweries so you can see how the process works and just kind of guide you through implementing it in your state. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for Jenny? Let's see. Nancy says she can always be a beer taster. If you need help there. I'm sure many would take that up as well.
Yeah, well, we get a lot of samples.
Jenny,
Yes.
this is Linnell. How stable are the businesses, the microbrewers and stuff in Iowa? I mean, do you have a lot of openings and shutdowns, or because I know we had a few kind of larger breweries open up here in Kansas. They were medium size, I guess. And then, now they're closed. So I wasn't sure how that looks in Iowa.
Actually, during the pandemic, we pretty much halted the brewery project for a while because they were struggling to stay open. So we did see a couple of breweries close during the pandemic, but for the most part, they're all hanging in there and doing really well. We just continued to see them growing. And it was interesting how they adapted during the pandemic, but really environmental initiatives and sustainability was the last thing on their minds while they were trying to stay open. But no, we haven't seen a huge impact, Linnell.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good, I guess, I mean.
The beer's
That's
still
good.
flowing. Yeah.
Yes. Gotta make sure that happens.
Right. Totally agree.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I had a really quick question as well, and I might have missed this, and if I did, I'm sorry. So in terms of so from what you've described, in terms of the certification program portion and sort of the upfront certification that you have do you guys, or have you given thought to like measuring some type of a metric of then, like, you know, what those best management practices are actually saving them in terms of like water and cost savings and things like that? Or are those types of numbers available to the breweries or like measurable in any way?
Mm-hmm. Well, great question. So we always hire a University of Northern Iowa student intern, and they work with the Brewers Association. The Brewers Association has benchmarking tools for breweries. So they basically just input their utility data, water usage data, and we have a student intern who does that for the breweries. And then what they get back are reports from these benchmarking tools that compares their sustainability practices with sustainability practices of other breweries of their size. And it also calculates potential cost savings and cost savings of some of these practices. So we use the BA's tools to do that. But that was a great question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That would be really interesting too, to see that, or I mean, for the businesses as well as for you guys. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Jenny, we're right at time. I just have one question regarding the kind of the scoring rubric that you use when you're doing these certifications. Is it similar? You know, you mentioned, you know, bronze, silver, gold, platinum level certifications. You know, my mind goes directly to LEED certifications. Is it a similar sort of model that you're using?
Actually, it's very similar to LEED certification, yes, but I think just brewery specific. One of the states that we looked at when we first started thinking about doing this was Colorado and Denver. They have a green program. So they have a green brewery, green restaurant, green hospitality. And so we took a look at that and basically went off of that rather than LEED certification, but it's very similar.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
just more of a comment for both you and others. There's a group of it's called the Sustainable States Network out there, and it's a bunch of state organizations that have, you know, a state sustainability program. I can recall off the top of my head, Minnesota, Connecticut, Maryland, New York have these types of programs. And so, Jenny, when you brought up that other states have been reaching out to you, interested in starting something that's similar, just triggered my memory. I haven't engaged with that group in a while. It dates back to my time when I worked for EPA in Region 3. But might be something, if any of you folks are interested in that network and just, you know, other contacts to make, might be something to explore. So I'd be happy to share more information if you're interested.
Yes, sounds great.
That does sound good, Andrew. It'd probably be great to have them as a featured speaker for a bi-monthly, because there might be a lot of programs interested in that.
Yep.
Okay,
Sounds
well,
good.
with that, thank you, Andrew, for organizing, reaching out, and thank you so much, Matt and Jenny, for sharing your program details. We all want to congratulate you and appreciate the fact that you put yourselves out there so other people can learn. Not just you getting your recognition, but you know, what more importantly, so that we're transferring this information so other programs and other industry can learn from your leadership. So thank you so much and congratulations. With that, thank you. With that, I want to turn this over to Allison Crowther. She is doing this next section. It says my name by it, but it should say Allison's name. And so she's going to introduce us to the Google Jamboard, and we are going to use that as a kind of a brainstorming session. So Allison, I know you're going to put some information in the chat for us, and just go ahead and if you don't mind turning your camera on while you're speaking, that would be great. Thank you, Allison.
Absolutely. Give me just a second to share my screen. And I did just drop the link to the Jamboard in the chat, so you should all have that. And I see the first person has joined already. So just kind of a quick orientation on how to use Jamboard, just in case you haven't used it before. I know I've only used it once or twice. So we're going to have 4 questions. Each has its own slide. You're going to navigate back and forth using this here at the top. So the main thing we're going to be using here, you have a few different editing functions on the left side here. The main thing we're going to use is the sticky note, just because that makes it a lot easier to rearrange things as we go if we need to make space or organize to group ideas or anything like that. So to use the sticky note, you just click that, type in your test message. You can change the colors along here if you want. None is an option. I wouldn't recommend it. I feel like that's just going to make it harder to visually separate things. And then you can go ahead and save your post. It will decide automatically where it's going to put it, but you can move it around. You can move other people's around as well. If you need to edit the text or anything, oh, somebody moved it. You can edit here, or delete or duplicate. I'm not sure that would really come up. And then you do have the undo and redo buttons up here. So that's just going to apply to your work that you've done. You can't undo someone else's work with the undo button anyway. If you exit your session, so everybody except I think me is in here anonymously because of the way I set up the link. So if you exit and come back, it's going to see you as a separate session. You won't be able to undo work from a previous session, but again, you can just edit and delete pretty freely anyway. And then again, the main thing is sticky note. You will use select to kind of move things around, but once you post a sticky note, by default, it will put you back on select. So really it's just if you select a different tool, then you might have to go back to select manually, but other than that, pretty straightforward. And then there's also the zoom up here, and that zoom will only affect your view. It's not going to change how it appears for anybody else. Any questions before we get started on this? And it looks like we've already started. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this one.
And so the idea, Allison, is that you've got 4 questions you posted here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this first question, what should the future goals of the roundtable be or include? So we're going to give a timed amount, a period, or how are you doing this, Allison?
How about 5 minutes or when it starts to kind of cool down? Because I think it's going to start getting going. And then if it starts kind of tapering off, we can kind of take the cue from that. But let's shoot for 5 minutes. Sound okay?
That sounds perfect. So people are going to click on that link, join, and then they're going to go to the sticky note and type in ideas. You can do more than one sticky note. Lots of options. Or can you do more than one sticky note?
Oh, absolutely. And I would recommend just kind of one thought per sticky note, and put up as many as you want, but I think it'll be easier to go through them if you just kind of do one per.
And one last question for you, Allison. Are we able to save this then or do a screen capture? Is there anything like that I need to assist you with?
So this is tied to the Gmail account that I used to set this up. So we have it saved there. You can also, if anybody wants to download this and keep a copy for themselves, you can download as PDF.
Thank you.
So it's been about 5 minutes. I'm thinking we can go to the next one, and then if you come up with something that you want to go back and add on this one, you can of course navigate back. Nancy, does that sound okay, or did you want to stop and discuss in between?
Let's see, it is 11:55. And yeah, let's just go to the next one because I think that's the most important aspect of this. And then we can come back and digest as we have time.
Okay. And
Thank
again,
you.
if you, oh, and looks like some people have already gotten started. Question here, what featured topics and speakers should the bi-monthly meetings include? And again, if you have something on the previous slide that you want to go back and add, you can always go back and do that.
Great job, everybody. We have no shortage of topics for the next couple of years, so this will make it easy for the next chair and executive board.
All right, it's 11:01, so I'm going to go ahead and move us to the next one. So what other needs do the P2 or other R7 programs have that could be addressed by the roundtable?
Okay, it's so quiet. All right, should we move on to the next one? And then we'll have time to go back and take a look at these.
Okay. So would you like to volunteer or nominate someone for the Region 7 P2 Roundtable Executive Board?
Okay, so I'll talk just a little bit to get some interest going here. Technically, we have 3 positions for the executive board, and Jeff, chime in if you will, because Jeff has been in charge of this. He's been taking information related to anybody who might be interested in serving. And so we have a chair role. And the chair, I've been serving as the chair for the last couple of years. Jeff has served as the chair many times. And let's see here, I'll start my video since I'm supposed to follow my own rules. and the chair basically is going to lead the executive board, which is the vice chair and the secretary. And the chair will work with them to make sure that we identify speakers and we set an agenda for the bi-monthly meetings, which turn out to be about 4 meetings a year. And then in the fall, we have a planning meeting to plan the roundtable. And we also invite our EPA P2 person to sit in on some of those executive board meetings or some of the special planning meetings that we do, especially if it involves EPA. The vice chair operates in a capacity just to support and be there for the chair if needed. And like this year, Jeff took on certain roles that he did depending on what needed to be done. And this getting the executive board together for the next session here, it's a 2-year session. Was one of the things that he did. Then the secretary is a role that Linnell has been serving in for 2 years. Before that, I served in it 2 or 4 years. So I am not willing to do that again. But that is taking some brief notes, and depending on the person and how many notes they like to take, but taking brief notes with regard to the meetings, and then keeping the agendas, doing some of that record keeping, setting up some registration, those kinds of things. Those are the 3 roles. And Jeff, do you want to say anything more on that?
The only thing I'll say is I've completed 20 years working on the P2 Region 7 Executive Board. I might want a break.
Yep. And in those, yeah.
If need be, I'd still be willing to serve as vice chair, but there's other people with other thoughts.
So we've got and so I think we'll just start here, Allison, if that's okay with you. And Jeff, maybe I could let you facilitate this, this board if you want to read some things off. And so this is going to be very P2 focused, certainly. because it's a P2 roundtable. So go ahead, Jeff.
It looks like several people have suggested Doug. There's also been a suggestion of Bruce. Jenny, this is so small, I'm having a hard time reading it because I'm old. It looks like Jenny might be suggested as well. She did serve as chair of the roundtable for 2 years. This is a history background. And Linnell's been nominated again for secretary. Are there any other suggestions?
Hi, this is Doug. So someone's picking on me, a couple people. I wouldn't mind serving and so forth. I don't think I could be chair, mainly because, we're starting our program. So I don't have a tremendous amount of time. So I wouldn't want to take a senior role and not be able to do it sufficiently, but I wouldn't mind participating in some form or fashion, whether it even might be vice chair or something.
So and I'll just say that it's going to take you about 2 to 3 hours every 2 months. Yeah. Other than the round, some of the roundtable work, but that's basically at 2 to 3 hours. And we will continue to keep the website going. So we will be happy to do that. And if other programs don't have a platform to host meetings on, that is an easy thing for us to do. We would be happy to continue to do that too.
Hey, so really quick, this is Lisa Dunning, and I just wanted to chime in here. So Andrew, Jim Callier, Stan Walker, and we've all been having, conversations, within EPA about, the roundtable leadership and just how great that, the efforts are to pull the region together with pollution prevention and the sharing and just the fantastic network and connection that has been built. And also just recognizing that it's, just harder and harder on a voluntary basis and things. And so we have been trying to, demystify a couple different options of how to move forward. And it's slowly but surely, we've been trying to unwrap this. So just one Post-it note that I threw in there that, again, that we've been kind of talking about on the EPA side would be the possibility of getting the P2 hub to help with the leadership of this. Maybe that would be a way to help. And like I said, it's a possibility. We don't have it, nailed down, but that could be an option for discussion as well.
I might have a little bit of a rub with the P2 hub being the chair. I think serving in some capacity of support for the Roundtable Executive Committee would be a good thing. But I think the actual chair needs to be somebody from the region. But I appreciate your suggestions.
Yeah, this is great because we wanted to hear the feedback and, just how ways to help with this and stuff too.
I think they could have a supporting role somehow, and I'm not exactly sure what that would be, but I think the new executive committee can work that out.
Yeah, I agree. And I was just going to say, Doug, I think I picked on you a little bit. And so, and one of the reasons is we probably never had anyone from Missouri be on our board, or it was so long ago. And Nebraska, maybe, I'm not sure if in your tenure, Bruce, you have, but it's great to get new blood. And I think, Doug, that's what we're seeing you as is, hey, you're new to the program, you're bringing in some new ideas. And so that's always great. The vice chair typically has not taken a big role, but I think that if you are willing to be chair, and either Jeff or myself or someone else, we could work with you in tandem to kind of co-chair it, or as your vice chair, and do, split the 2 or 3 hours, every couple of months it takes to get this going. Now, 2 or 3 hours is certainly minimal. And to be able to put more time into it, obviously, would be better for the full roundtable, but you are volunteers, so.
The planning meeting time period would probably involve a little bit more, because it also is development of the agenda for the roundtable meeting. And a historical note, Missouri has been on the executive board a very long time ago, about the same time that I first started getting involved, about 20 years ago. And then Rick Yoder was an executive committee member for quite some time. Yeah, as far as Nebraska goes.
Yep. And Gene Waters and
Yep.
David Carter. And then, like I said, myself from Kansas, and then Linnell. So.
Well, and Jenny was president for 2 years, or
And
vice
Jenny.
chair for 2 years.
Yeah. So it has been kind of Iowa, Kansas heavy, Nebraska in there, and.
Well, yeah, it does definitely sounds that way, and appreciate, all the work that you guys have done over the years. I wouldn't mind, I guess, co-chairing, if that's possible, and I'll nominate Bruce. So since it's Missouri, Nebraska, it might be Missouri, Nebraska time. If Bruce has got time, Bruce, it's up to you, but I wouldn't mind co-chairing it with you. We can kind of share the responsibilities that way.
I guess I'd say I'm willing to help. I'm, like you, very reluctant to take much responsibilities on. We've just started a new bachelor's program in environmental engineering here that we have to kind of stand up, hire faculty, and go through accreditation. So I'm willing to put a few hours, every quarter in, but I'm a little afraid if it gets very much, I'm going to end up dropping the ball. So I want to be real cautious about my commitments, given kind of that additional administrative commitment that I'm not given administrative credit for within the university.
And we would have a handoff meeting with you guys just to tell you how we did it. It would be up to you to decide how you want to do it. But seriously, the bi-monthly, other than the featured speaker, the bi-monthly agendas don't change that much. You just have to make adjustments based on the timing of the meeting. So that's why I was saying about an hour prep where we meet as an executive board, and then another hour of the roundtable.
Okay, well, that'll work for me. Like I said, as long as I have someone, Nancy or Jeff, to lean on every now if I need to. I could.
I'd be willing to serve as some kind of support. I don't know that I necessarily want an office, but like a de facto kind of sub position.
Good deal.
Good, yeah.
Jeff, how about the role of an advisor?
Yes, that would be good.
That's what I'm saying too, yeah, advisor. So if there is not someone else to serve as vice chair, I will, but I can be an advisor as well. So you would definitely have lots of support.
Well, why don't, Bruce, I mean, if you're all right with it.
I'm willing to kind of serve and try to help out as long as kind of just my limitations on my bandwidth kind of are understood.
Yeah, if I did chair, you did vice chair.
Sure.
And then if Linnell still wants to serve as secretary, that'd be outstanding, because I'm outstanding in that, has that experience. And then Jeff, if you want to be advisor for Bruce and I think that would be good.
I could do the advisor thing. That'd be fine. You know, I think Linnell, if she wants to, she's done a really good job with notes and sending out information about the meetings and such, that she would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'd be glad to help with that and continue on with that, because I can create, you know, help you guys create the agendas, make sure things get posted. And like I've done, send out the meeting invites and things like that, or anything you guys need me to do along those lines.
All right. Thanks, you guys. That's awesome. All right. We've got it. We've got it. It's great. Thank you so much. And we'll make it as easy on you, and anything that that I can do to help, but you've got a great team here. So I would suggest that we stay on time, and that the executive board will ask Allison to download this and send the file out to everyone, just the P2 Region 7 or listserv. And then everyone will have this, and this is something that the executive board can use going forward. Don't you think, Jeff?
Yep. The one thing I was going to ask you, if the individual presentations will be saved somewhere, so there would be that as well as the video recording.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can put those all on our website. I've just got a few of them, the ones that were sent to me. So I don't think we want all of them. It's kind of bulky. But the ones maybe from EPA, or if there's something else you guys want, we can send them out individually.
I think some of the EPA presentations would be good.
And Nancy, you
Yeah,
asked me
we'll
to
certainly make
remind
those
you.
available.
You asked me to remind you, Nancy, that you were going to show everyone where we are saving the everything from our bi-monthly meetings and stuff on our website, so everybody was aware of that. I don't know when you want to do that, but you said remind me tomorrow. That's what I'm so.
Thank you. I do appreciate that very much. And so this is probably a new website for us since everybody's seen it, but if you go under pollution prevention, we have a lot of things, but we have kind of put it under resources. And you do have to scroll down to get to it. But then
You're not sharing. You're not sharing.
Oh, I'm not?
No.
Oh, whoops. There we go. Thank you so much. You have to press the share button, don't you? All right. So this is our new site, and it's almost a year old, but you go under pollution prevention and then resources. And Linnell sends the direct link out for this all the time in her correspondence. And then you just click here, and this is where, and Doug and Jeff and Bruce, if you want any of this edited, just let Linnell know and she can edit it on the fly. But we will change this for sure. So it's no longer me. And then this is a history of since we started this about a year ago, I guess it was. This is a history of all the agenda notes, and the recordings are here. So we will set this up the same way we did before, and it's in reverse chronological order. So it's pretty easy to find, and at least it's a place to archive our materials. Great. Okay.
And it has been, we have been doing those notes as running notes. So I just take the previous agenda and add it to the notes. So when you look at the last meeting, what you can see is all of the notes from every meeting prior to that as well. So you don't have to click through each one, but that's kind of how we've set it up. Just FYI, I don't know if you mentioned that.
No, I really like this because then you know, it's not like you have to pull a bunch of documents. And so I think I'm sharing, no, I'm not sharing my screen. So basically this is really a nice format that Linnell's got going here. And so it's got the most recent bi-monthly, and then in red, for the most part in red, you're going to see the notes. And there's some months where there's a ton going on and other months where there isn't. But yeah, this is how she's got it set up.
I mean, generally, I don't keep the notes read. I think it was just that one time, Nancy, that I did on this last one. I should have converted it really back to regular font.
Oh, Jim has a question.
Yeah, I don't know if this is appropriate for this part or not, but I think on one of the previous charts, I put up a question about the charter. Because years ago, there used to be a form, you know, the roundtable used to be a formal organization with a charter and all that. Has that been kind of abandoned by the roundtable, which is fine?
There was a, it's not a charter. There is a
501c3
bylaws.
Bylaws.
Yeah,
We've
I think
got
I worked on
bylaws, but
those.
we're not a recognized 501c3 or anything. And, you know, P2 Rick had that on site. I don't know if I've got a copy of it, or it was Nancy, if you guys got it.
Yeah.
Once they closed down.
I think I was secretary then, so I think I might have it.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, Jim.
Well, it sounds like we've moved away from that, which is fine because, you know, a lot of that stuff wasn't happening and the organization's changed a fair bit.
I don't know that any of us are real wild about handling money like a 501c3
No, and I'm not saying to get into
either.
that realm either.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, there were certain things in there about EPA can only be an advisor and the states must do this. And we're just like, well, hey, we're lucky to get people to lead and volunteer. So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our roles are still kind of limited to probably what was said in there, but that's okay.
Mhm.
You know,
And that's worked out great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have been
Jennifer.
faithful supporters and you know, obviously the speakers that we've had have been great. And so plus you've had several people on, you know, from EPA. That support is really, really great. So thank you, Jim.
No,
And
no
Andrew
problem.
and
We
others,
plan to
yeah.
continue, and you know, this is hopefully DeAndre's first of many P2 roundtables.
Yeah, and I'll just say very quickly, and then Nancy, we can roll into the reporting discussion. But just to add a little bit more color to that, you know, I think something like a charter could be beneficial if, and I say that if you all were interested in pursuing grant funding for this through the RFA competition. And when I say a charter could be useful in that case, just because it provides the parameters that Jim was mentioning, you know, in particular, you know, for the roundtables that are discussed within the RFA, the bulk of that material needs to be dedicated towards entities outside of EPA. And so clarifying that would, clarifying that in a document like a charter could help make the case for using grant funds to support this roundtable. And I know that that's been, you know, under consideration for a while here. And we've talked about it over the past couple of years. And, you know, that right now you all are providing leadership on this in a voluntary capacity. And I think we've all seen the benefit of the roundtable, you know, continuing to act, but just wanted to throw that out there as, you know, if it's something that you'd like to dedicate grant funding towards, and you know, I don't think it would be that much, but you know, there would be certain parameters with that might need to be spelled out a little bit clearer. So I hope that makes sense. Jim, anything you want to add there?
Sorry, I was on a different screen looking at Michelle's answer to your questions this morning. But yeah, I think you captured it. It's probably not required, but it would probably help.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. Well, we can chat more about this going forward. I know we're a little bit over here in our agenda, so I'll move right into the reporting element. I know we have some questions regarding kind of narrative and match. I do have a few slides here that I just plan to run through. You all have done a really good job of with reporting. So I don't think much of this is going to apply to you, but I do just want to cover it for all intents and purposes, just so that everybody's kind of up to speed and on the same page. So I'll kind of move through these slides pretty quickly, and then we can get into some discussion. So let me pull this up. Not sure why it's not letting me do that, but okay. So hopefully you can see this.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
You bet.
So measures and reporting. Again, this is the primary website that we use. The link is right there. I share this because this also links to the templates here that I believe I shared with our TAPs before. And you all have been using, so that's fantastic. But just, you know, for your awareness, these are present on our website as well. And then I'm just going to walk through a few kind of examples here of kind of what we're looking for, and what some issues that we've had with that we've come across in some reporting in the past. Not necessarily yours. These are just, you know, more general examples of things that we've encountered. So, this is just an example from, again, this is the technical assistance template that we're using. And this is a great example of what we're looking for. It has the granular data that we can upload very easily and kind of slice and dice it as needed. This is the kind of the leadership template that we've been using. And this was updated as of FY20 and 21 from the previous templates from FY18 and 19. Again, just upfront noting that you know, these templates aren't mandatory to use. They're optional. If you have some sort of format that better works for you, we'd be certainly amenable to that. But it's really the content of the template that is needed, and that's, you know, that granular level data that we're looking for. So the next couple slides show a mix of the kind of leadership and technical assistance reporting. Again, some of you do both. Some just utilize you know, one of the spreadsheets based on, you know, what's covered under your grant. So this is an example from one of the leadership templates, and so just a few things to note here. So this particular example reports the disaggregated facility level outcomes, but it lacks the facility level information and implementation actions. And it's also noting here, if you see here at the bottom, the worksheets are designated by measures rather than the if we flip back here, rather than the facilities themselves. You can see here at the bottom, facility 1, 2, 3, etc. The facility level outcome breakouts here are more helpful for validation than the total aggregate outcomes, but the validation is still impeded because there are no descriptions of the actions implemented. And then also in this case, let's see, the amplification in this case isn't realistic. There's some information lacking between the outcome that's achieved and the actions that are actually implemented. So it's missing just a little bit of that granular data that we're looking for. This is from a separate example, but again, showing an example of that lack of specificity. The results here are aggregated both for technical assistance and for the leadership programs. There's no implementation results listed, and there aren't any further breakouts of results in the report or attachments. In this case, let's see, what do we have here? So this does provide disaggregated potential outcomes that are described by sector, so that's fantastic. But there aren't any recommended actions provided. And in addition to those recommendations, there's no implemented actions or actual outcomes. So that it makes it hard for us to report, amplify, or analyze in this case. And for the leadership project listed here, this report does provide aggregated outcome values achieved, but the validation in this case is going to be lacking, and there are no actions to amplify or analyze. On this slide, we just, again, another example of the worksheets being organized by measure indicator rather than by facility. You can see here down at the bottom, energy purchased, deletions, changes, narratives. So the reports are the great in-depth descriptions, which we'll talk about in a second when we talk about narratives. But it makes it hard to follow. So all in all, again, talking about just the need for granular data to avoid information getting lost. And so if the facility information isn't provided, it makes it challenging for us to be able to sort by sector, NAICS code, or NEA. If recommendations are not followed up on, when we're talking about following up on assessments that are done, recommended actions, and then the follow-up taking place for whether those actions have been implemented or not. It's tough to report out on the outcomes. And then if that facility level actions aren't broken out line by line, the recommendations that you're suggesting through those assessments, it's hard to grab onto those individual actions if they're aggregated. So that's really what I wanted to cover in slide form for right now. I think there were two big things that kind of jumped out that I think we'd like to spend a few more minutes talking about here, and that was the conversation around narratives and conversation around match. And I'll start with the narrative conversation. I'm going to pause very quickly though, because Nancy and I were talking earlier, and I know I was getting a little bit of feedback on my end. Can folks still hear me okay? Getting any background noise at all?
We are getting background noise,
okay,
but it's not like it was. It's not like it was earlier.
But we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We just hear someone else as well.
Well, let me hold on one second. Let me just close the door just so that Okay, sorry about that. Figured while I wasn't sharing my screen, that would be a good time to try and address that. So, okay, so narratives. You know, this is you know, a popular question, something that we've talked to our headquarters office quite a bit about. Something that I've pitched to them as well for future grant competitions. Is just the idea, you know, obviously narratives are necessary for final reporting, but I know there's some confusion upon what's needed or necessary for the semi-annual reports. And again, you all have done a great job on your reporting, and it makes it very easy for us to you know, be able to analyze those reports and get the information that we're looking for. And, you know, I guess in my opinion, I feel that, you know, narratives along the way, in addition to final reporting, are of value both to us and to you. And I say that because, you know, you all are grantees, so I'd like you to weigh in here as well on your thoughts on this. But you know, if you're having to do those narratives for the final reporting, I think by doing a narrative along the way, you're able to synthesize that material when it comes to final reporting and use those semi-annual reports as guidance documents. You know, we've seen, and our headquarters office has noted this as well, that, you know, we recognize that the semi-annual narratives are optional. We don't require those within the RFA. Again, it's something that I think could use a little bit of clarity around. It might be beneficial to have some sort of optional template similar to what we do for the spreadsheets. As I know, there's, you know, some confusion on whether a narrative should just be submitted via email or embedded within the spreadsheets, or you know, pulled out and having a separate you know, 1 or 2 pager created. So that's a suggestion that I've made, but they've noted that, you know, this has been a positive step, that in conjunction with the spreadsheets, that narratives have been really beneficial towards reporting and describing the facility level contents, and giving good explanations, in particular for recommendations that have been implemented versus those that haven't. So Lisa, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it just takes a couple minutes to get all my buttons clicked. Yes, and so I just wanted to let the group know, for the grants that I manage, anytime you send me a narrative, whether that's in the body of an email or if it's like a Word document attachment or something like that, then I save that to that reporting section. So that is still captured. And even though there's not a specific format, like I said, if it's in an email, Word document, whatever, I keep that with the Excel spreadsheets just for that reporting session. So it's still captured. Thanks. Thank
you, Lisa. Yeah, and I've been doing the same thing as well for the grants that I manage. And I think, you know, that's a best practice that we'll continue to do here at EPA, is making sure that all of that continues to be captured, you know, in whatever format that you're choosing to use. So Nancy or Linnell or others, you know, do you have any other specific questions related to narrative? Did we cover what you were looking for in that sense? Jim, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Yes, I did not know you could alter the Excel files or that the templates were optional. But that's fine. I like the templates. They've simplified and streamlined things. I just think complementing them with the narrative is good.
I agree. Yeah, and I mean, again, for the spreadsheets, you know, I think some of you have elected to just it's off to the right side there, and just include more, additional comments or narrative that pertain to specific recommendations or a specific facility, right, and embedding that in the spreadsheet. And others have, put together a Word document or, whatever works for you right now. That's really the bottom line for the time being. Jeff, you came over here. Did you have a question?
Well, I would say I would like to actually put the narrative on the spreadsheets, and I can't do anything to change the spreadsheet at all, other than the few lines that are open to me. I can't go over to the right side of the grid and type something.
Okay.
So I've always attached in the email, I've always attached a Word document, because sometimes we feel like we need to add something to the proposal besides just doing so many internships and so many follow-ups to make it more attractive, more juicy, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jim, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add from a grant management standpoint, the narratives are very helpful because as project officers, both on the technical administrative side, we are required to do reviews at least once a year to assure that the work in the work plan is being done as the schedule suggested, and that money is also kind of being expended at a rate in the match added for the state grants. As we kind of get into, the project moving on, to make sure it's all, on schedule and the appropriate work that was committed to is being done, so that when you're, sometimes you have trainings or workshops or other things that may not fit into the facility specific level data, we have to have it documented that those are being done. And, Andrew and Lisa and them are doing it either through the emails or other things that come in. But, it is a requirement, and it can help in terms of the overall grant management responsibilities that we have. And I'm kind of saying that in light of the potential money that's, we all heard about that's out there. There's going to be increased oversight coming as well on whatever mechanisms we put out to put funding, that we have that good documentation, and those calls that we have are great to help fill it in, but it can be very helpful to have a narrative that kind of runs through the work plan and the time schedule and the budget that, documents kind of where we're at in terms of getting things done that we're committed to in the work plan. And, delays and other things are going to come up as they have the last few years, but it's important for us to have that documented, that, those things happen, because who knows, in 5 years or something now, when somebody might want to audit these grants, we may not remember the conversations, or the people that were managing the grants may not be available. So we're kind of stuck with what's ever in the record in terms of our management and oversight from our side, as well as from your all side. So just kind of wanted to add that in, that, we do have that responsibility, making sure that those items in the work plan and the schedule and the money that follows it are being used as projected, or it's documented that, hey, this is going to fall back a quarter, or, we only got so many businesses this year, and, due to COVID or whatever, and, we're going to try and double up or something next year.
Yeah, and it's much easier when that language is coming from you than for us to try and, synthesize spreadsheets and craft the language on our own. So, we want to make sure that we're communicating, the right information to, our folks internally, and externally for that matter, but, that, you all are doing the work on the ground. So we want to make sure that we're appropriately communicating, the work that you're doing. All right. If there aren't any other questions, I think, again, these are continuing and ongoing conversations here. But I do want to spend a few minutes talking about match, as I know that's another hot topic that's been, frequently discussed, and it's frankly always been a hot issue because of the requirement that's built in within the RFA. And particularly even more challenging over the past couple of years with COVID, I'm sure. So, I think the question, as I understand it, pertains to flexibilities that, are there any flexibilities with the use of match within the grant period? And, can that be applied for actions that you're doing that, if you're following up on, as we talked about with the reporting, if you're following up on recommendations to see what's implemented beyond, the 2-year funding period, can that follow up, in the match that coincides with that, be included within the grant? And as with many things, the answer to this is yes and no. Within our RFA, it states, and it's, I can point you directly to section 3. Let's see, section 3, subsection B, which talks about the cost sharing and match requirements. And it specifically states that, the match requirement may be applied at the time of the award, or at specific intervals during the 2-year project period. So that, with that in mind, the short answer to the question is no, there is not flexibility there. However, there's a delineation between funding period and project period that I think needs to be made. And, when you guys are, selected and awarded a grant that has a 2-year funding period associated with it. So, for the most recent period, that's FY20 and 21. However, as also stated in the RFA, you can use that funding period for up to 3 years to coincide with some of that follow-up activity. And that project period, frankly, might be extended even beyond 3 years due to no cost extensions, for example, due to COVID-19. So there are some sort of built-in flexibilities with that. But again, it's sort of a yes and no. The match has to be tied to the specific funding period that it's associated with. But within that, the project period may or may not be able to be extended based on, what you all propose within your applications and work plans, as well as, situations like COVID that arise and require no cost extensions and the like. So that's the short answer. The other part of this relates to kind of subsequent funding and future award years. So again, this is tied to the fact that this is competitive, and there's a caveat there that you'd have to, it's not assumed that all current grantees would be future grantees, but you can make the case in, for example, in the coming RFA that you'd like to use some of that funding to follow up on activities from previous the previous years or previous clients that you've had. So that just needs to be spelled out in the work plan and budget. But again, I say that because there's a big caveat there with the fact that, that isn't guaranteed. And, the match requirement for a previous grant still needs to be fulfilled for that funding period. But you can still use match for a following grant, assuming you're awarded, to use it to follow up on previous business activities. Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, I want to add just a piece of clarity to it, though. It has to be match that's earned during a valid project and budget period. So, if there's a gap or if it's funds that were earned, well, yeah, if it was funds that were earned during a prior grant period, I don't know that those can be applied to that future grant period.
Correct.
It has to be during that budget and budget period. It's would be in a new grant. So there is a caveat there. Unless it was actual dollars coming into your organization. And then those dollars, as in physical money that, somebody paid you before and you didn't use it. Somehow it was kept for a future grant and then used as match.
So can I provide an example and maybe you could tell me if this is correct or not?
Sure.
And this is where, in the future, and maybe it's already there, but putting some of these kind of FAQ examples somewhere, maybe ERG could help you with that or something, I'm not sure. But, or put it in the RFA, I guess, and I probably need to go back and read that section 3 of the RFA. But so for example, in our current grant period, which would be FY federal fiscal year 20 and 21, we say we'll go back to 2018. I don't know if this is the wording exactly, but basically, if we have a client from federal fiscal year 19 that we follow up on as part of this current funding period, and it was written in our project period that we were going to go back to 2018, and we find that they implemented a big project, body equipment. It was based on so we've worked with them in the past, obviously. There's other people that we've worked with in the past, whether it was training at conferences, direct technical assistance, interns, that type of thing. And so then their equipment purchases, the money they put into their training, some of the other things all related to this P2 project could be used as match towards our funding period, because we did say in the project period that we would be doing that follow-up. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. And again, a caveat that your match from the FY 18-19 was already met as well.
Sure, absolutely. That final report is, signed, sealed, and delivered. And so we had an example come up with a client from 2006 that they didn't implement until 2012, but we found out about it through a conference. Well, we just had to let that go technically because but it was a huge project. So that's the only problem. Sometimes we can grab that data, but technically because of some of these strict periods of time, things that might have taken 6 years or whatever to implement, unless we put it in our project period, specifically in the proposal, then that's not data we're going to chase after, whether that's economic data or environmental data.
Right. And, it makes sense. We understand your limitations there, both from a personnel standpoint as well as the longevity of some of these implementations taking place. Significantly. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5 years after they were recommended, depending on the facility. So, as bottom line, it needs to be very clearly stated within your work plan that that's an activity that you're planning to be following up on. And I think that way you're covering your bases there. Jim, anything else you want to add to Nancy's example?
Yeah, I do want to confirm this with the grant specialist. And I think there are already existing, maybe not P2 specific, but circulars or documents that'll clarify a lot better on match. And I think she can help us put our hands on those particular things that we can then send out.
That'd be
So
great.
one of our follow-up items is to check with Heather and, get further guidance and other things that'll help in terms of, what counts as match and when can it be counted and those sorts of things. Because the match part is, it's not just a P2 thing. It's a government-wide kind of thing.
Mhm. Right. And we want to make sure that we're crossing the T's.
Yep. Especially when I know that there will be audits done, whether they're going to come to our region or not, I don't know, but there will be ones done. The same thing once we get in a better COVID situation. We haven't done any on-site grant reviews of any of your all grants in I don't know how many years. So we may have to start scheduling some of those as well, because that will also help increase, our showing that we are appropriately managing these grants and that you guys are doing a great job as well. It's in everybody's interest to kind of do that. Because then, if something's caught, it's caught early and can be addressed versus somebody later on catching things. And then, potentially those things continuing. We don't expect that, but, I know in past years, we used to come out with maybe like 4 people or something to come talk about the grants management and look in the financial books, kind of go through stuff just so we can say, yep, we've been there, talked to them, done this, write up a little report.
Okay.
Obviously, I'll be scheduled in advance so we can make sure that this goes for any of our grantees that, we do that appropriately. So we'll have like Jeanette come as our administrative person on the program side, probably Andrew or Lisa. We'll probably have the grant specialist or even somebody from our financial office come, and then I'll be there. Stan will probably be there too. And it shouldn't take more than a day, I wouldn't think. Or maybe we do it as an afternoon and a morning or something, whatever we can jointly schedule out. But I envision we're going to need to get back to doing those, once COVID clears up a little better than it is, because we still got some places that are hot zones.
Yeah. Well, with that, it is 12:05. We are scheduled to end at noon. And so are there any other questions for Andrew?
Well, again, I expect this to be a, continuous, dialogue. And, if you all have any questions, feel free to either email me or we can certainly pick this up and add, topics like this to a bi-monthly agenda as well. Happy to do that.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate all of Region 7 support and EPA support and everyone else being on the line. I took so many pearls from this meeting. I just felt like the technical speakers were really, really good, and we really got some meat today. Obviously, we have a very bright future in P2 because we do have funding. And there's just some really new ground that we're going to be working on. So it's exciting to know how much we're going to be able to learn. But I just want to thank everybody for attending, and especially want to thank Doug and Bruce for stepping up, and Linnell for another term, another 2-year term for serving as secretary. And thanks to Jeff for all of his leadership in the past 20 years. So have a great day, guys. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
We'll see you all in
Thanks, everybody.
person.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank
Happy
you,
holidays.
everyone.
Everybody.
And thanks to all of you for planning this. It was a great meeting. Thanks, guys.
It was good.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Thanks,